David, how are you, sir?
I'm very well, thanks, Chris. How are you going there in sunny England?
Yeah, mate, we're wonderful. You're supposed to be upside down if you're in Australia.
Well, I am. I'm sort of nailed to the floor. We wear these special boots here.
Yeah,
That's why I got no hair on the top. It all just sort of hung down and just fell off eventually.
it's your selfie stick. So, David, thanks ever so much for coming on the show. My gosh, um, I'm just going to read a little bit off my notes here for our friends at home. 66-year-old Australian from near Byron Bay, a place I had a great time visiting. Martial arts instructor. You have a particular focus in, just off the top of my head, psychokinesis, telepathy, remote viewing, past life experiences, the afterlife. You're a surfer. You're a lifelong student of the Viking Age, and you've studied the sagas, so the ancient Icelandic texts, the Norse languages, so on and so forth. Special effects illustrator in movies, kickboxer. We got quite a bit in common. I haven't I haven't done special effects in movies. You have, I think, like probably many of us, you've had your mental health experience, can we say? And
Yep.
gosh, yes, difficult to know where to start, except to say that I said to you earlier, you are talking to an actual Viking now. Oh,
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure to meet a real one.
well, it's kind of funny. My girlfriend takes the mick at me. She says, "No, you're a Viking slave. Thralls were the," and I say, "No, thralls were the lower caste of Viking culture, which is different from being a slave. We were warriors. we were up for the scrap." So I
You
don't
did the
know.
hard
I,
yakka.
I don't know if that's something to be proud of, but um, it is fascinating. I've lived in Scandinavia off and on for probably about 4 years. In fact, I've just been there recently. I took some guys up to the Arctic Circle for some
Mm.
survival and skiing. Um, yes, and your channel, I'm just going to show it here, is Viking Superpowers. And yeah, where do we begin? What 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 cultivated your interest in Norse culture?
Well, as a kid, I was really a sort of romantic, and believe it or not, English people and British people tend to think that us Aussies sort of disparage you guys, call you poms, think you're no good at cricket, all this sort of stuff. And you guys call us convicts and colonials and whatever. But every Englishman I've met, I've always got on really well with. And I was brought up to think of myself as a British gentleman. Like, I come from a long line of British soldiers. My great great grandfather was a major general in the Raj in India. A couple of my grandmother's brothers were commandos fighting the Japanese in New Guinea. My great uncle was the first guy out of the first boat at Gallipoli. My dad was in the Air Force. My other grandfather was in the Air Force. I was an Air Force officer in the Air Cadets. Um, yeah, but
I David, I get it. I tell you what, I love the colonial connection. I love it that
yeah,
I love it that if you walk into a pub and there's an Aussie sat next to you, you're just like brothers, just like that. You can just
yeah,
chat.
exactly.
It's a very unique bond. And I've been
And
fortunate.
that's
I've travelled in Australia, been to
yeah,
Byron Bay. I want to ask you about
that's
Nimbin because I went to Nimbin.
yeah.
I,
Ask me all about anything.
only the
was sort of
naughty
leading.
boys go to Nimbin. But I've met, I've been fortunate to know many wonderful Australians, both obviously over there but also in this country. And yeah, it. I mean, people are good, aren't they? Generally, people
Yeah.
are good, but
What I was sort of leading to was that English. So English or British history was big for me when I was a kid. My grandmother always taught me Scottish history. Said, "Don't forget you're a Scot." My ancestry is mostly Scottish, a little bit of Northern Irish, but we're also British. So I started off with a passion for medieval history, particularly Robin Hood, when I was 12 to 14. I was just really interested in knights and chivalry and that sort of stuff. And then I found this novel about the Vikings for kids called Vikings Dawn, and I was just totally hooked. It was such a well-written thing. It was by an English writer called Henry Treece. So I got the school library. I was quite a small guy. Well, I was a very small guy, like, biggish guy now, 6 foot, pretty solid. But as a boy, up until about 16, I was quite tiny. I was only about 5'2". So I'd hide in the library from these tribes of bullies wandering around looking for victims. And I just read every history book they had. And the librarian became my friend. And she said, you order whatever books you want. So I ordered a whole heap of Viking books, and I made myself, in my nerdy way, I just kept reading and reading and reading until I knew a lot about it. And 50 years later, still at it.
yeah. So one of the things I sort of learned living in Scandinavia, my Swedish friend was telling me once, she was like, Vikings isn't kind of the way we think it is in English culture. These just, these ferocious raiders that were just hell bent on raising hell. That no, actually, it was a period in Scandinavian culture that Viking means to travel, and that these guys were primarily traders. You feel free to correct me.
Look, people were different back then. They were basically Royal Marines without rules. They were big, tough mofos who grew up with an axe in their hand, chopping down trees since they're little fellas, and that becomes a natural weapon, is an axe, because it's just a natural weapon. Aristocrats carrying swords, they all use spears. But I see it as you got Scandinavian culture, which either benefited or suffered under the warrior class. And the Vikings, essentially, Viking just means, well, it means a raider and a trader. Like, they're always both. They're opportunistic. They would sort of do normal trade, but if you were heading off and they noticed you had a heap of cool treasure, they'd wait around the corner for you. G'day, mate. Yeah, hand it over. Otherwise, you're in trouble. And they did that to England infamously for quite a long time with the Danegeld. They just kept saying, well, unless you want to have an accident, we come back and do the same thing again. You just pay us every year and we'll stay away. So that's
Yeah, they
so
kind of
yeah, you're right.
Yeah, they kind of had
Viking
that.
is just a good way for the public. Is Viking. Like, I use it not in a scholarly way because I don't want to confuse people. I just call it the Vikings, even though I know that's just a specific warrior culture.
Yeah, it's funny when I'm just typing Vikings into a search engine and it just comes up with a TV series, which actually I thought was quite good. It was like a condensed version, wasn't it, of all the Viking history into one sort of saga, I
Yeah,
suppose you'd call it.
like that Northman movie we were talking about earlier. That the Vikings was the most historically correct thing I've ever seen about the Vikings. There was a few things that as a expert, I was like, God, like, they put the steerboard on the wrong side. In English we have port and starboard, and as a Royal Marine, you'd know that well. And the whole point is the starboard is on the right, and when you come into port, you don't come in where your starboard is, otherwise you'll break it or knock it off. And yet there they are with it on the wrong side, and I couldn't believe that somebody didn't pick that up. And one of the recent, have you ever? You're almost my age. Like, have you ever used a hand axe? You would have as a soldier, surely.
My son, by his 7th birthday, he was on to his second axe.
Is that right?
We take this stuff seriously in my family. You know, none of this sissy health and safety culture. His first birthday present was a knife, because I believe in this stuff. You know, I believe.
Yeah.
You know, I know what you say. I just believe in keeping it alive.
Yeah.
And
Well, you'll absolutely understand. Do you know what a lightning axeman is?
Can you enlighten me?
This might be an Australian thing. A lightning axeman. It means somebody who doesn't strike twice in the same place.
Okay.
You know how lightning never strikes twice in the same place. A lightning axeman just means a shitty axeman. You know, is out of control, right? No, beginners are always like that. But when you know how to use an axe, you just chop, 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 you're through. And in one of the most recent of these, I think it's called Vikings Valhalla, I really felt like an old geezer watching it, because these young blokes, they're all tough Vikings. They got big beards, and they're going to cut down London Bridge. And the guy goes, right, go, boys. And this guy, he's cutting down this post that's about, 2.5 foot thick. And he's got a tomahawk, and he's pecking away at it. You can see he's hit it about 100 times, just like taking chips off. And I'm just going, what? You guys have never seen somebody use an axe before? Like, surely somebody on the set knows how to use an axe. And just go, no. Like, we've got guys here. You'd probably still have it in the country in England, but I live in a country town here, and we still have axemen who have contests, and they time them. And these guys would go through that London Bridge thing in about 30 seconds. They're just like razor sharp axe, bang, 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 bang. And these dudes on this Viking show, they're just pecking away like, I don't know what. Somebody has no idea.
Yeah, my buddy Martin Maloney, he's been on the podcast a few times now. He was in Vikings.
Was he?
Yeah.
Oh, that would have been cool.
Yeah, we've had, he's a lovely bloke, Martin. We've had a couple of guests now in the Viking series. Well, in Vikings and Vikings Valhalla.
Well, Ragnar's an Aussie, you know that.
Say again.
Ragnar is an Aussie.
Oh yeah, well yeah. What's his?
Ragnar Lothbrok, the main guy.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of his real name. He was absolutely brilliant in that series.
It's funny, actually, because Chris Hemsworth, who's the other Viking cult thing, the Marvel Thor, he's also an Aussie. So, maybe the gods live down here now.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, Travis Fimmel.
Yeah, right. Travis Fimmel, that's right.
He just played a blinder. He was so good in that role. Even though they eked it out, he was probably would have been about 500 years old by the end of it. Yeah, he was really good, really good. So, gosh, I don't know where to start.
You better start asking me about the weird stuff.
Yeah,
what's that got to do with Vikings?
Okay, so David, what about God then? Let's just take a basic one. What's your understanding of God?
Well, personally, I was once a Christian minister, believe it or not, a pastor, not a reverend, just for a couple of years. But it was after I had a near-death experience, which was like the most profound thing that ever happened to me. And, all I really knew was that religion. And then after a couple of years, I sort of thought my way out of it. I thought, this is not big enough for me. This sort of negates all the Chinese and all the Africans and everybody who never heard of Christianity. Apparently, they're all off to hell. That can't be right. And I just started to, I left the church, and I essentially have come to the belief that the whole universe is conscious, and God to me is the great consciousness of everything. I don't know if there's something bigger than the universe, but that's universe is big enough. It beggars belief how big it is. But I think that we're little droplets of consciousness. We are God, but we choose to attenuate ourselves to live a life and experience, being Dave, being Chris, and whatever. And then when we cark out, we go, oh, wow. Like, well, is that what I was doing? Man, and I think of this life as we're the hardcore gods, we're like the Everest climbers, to go to the earth and put up with what we do here it's not fun, is it? It can be great fun, but there's aspects of it that are far from fun. And so you have to think, you'd have to be really hardcore if you chose this, So that's what I think God is.
Absolutely. That's kind of what we talk about a lot on this show is I'm always saying we're a manifestation of the quantum realm. So,
yes,
in the beginning there was, I don't even know if there was energy, but...
Well, light is basically just quantum, like light is packets of photons that act like waves or act like particles, but in the end, they're just energy.
Mm.
And you can't really go past that, Even Master Yoda says we're light.
Yeah,
he says we're big.
People listening now might be thinking this is like airy fairy or quasi science, but I think it's so much deeper than that, because if we could understand that we're all a manifestation of the same energy. So you are me and I am you. We're just experiencing life in these separate meat suits that give us the delusion that you're Dave, I'm Chris. Because we're seeing all this war, and it's utterly ludicrous. It's ludicrous to think if there's 30 Aussies in a pub and there's 30 Brits or English or Welsh, what that because one person says so, you suddenly turn on each other and massacre each other. It's utterly cretinously, ridiculously stupid, because we are all the manifestation, like you said, of the Godhead. It's kind of crazy David Icke got ripped to bits for saying this like 20 years ago or 30 years ago, but it we're a manifestation of the quantum energy. And
good on you.
It's if we could just understand that we are all the same, we are all one. We are literally all one. We're so much better looking for answers, how we can all get along and make a brighter future for everyone.
I had an interesting experience where there was a place called The Patch at the south end of the Gold Coast in Queensland. There's a popular surfy pub, and it used to really hop, and it get bands come from all over the world there. And I was the start of the biggest brawl they'd ever had there. I found this out years later, where I was carrying 4 Sothos and Coke, Southern Comfort and Coke. My mate's girlfriend was strutting up on the stage in a bikini, and I was having fun. I was just like, oh, pretty babes. And these 2 guys just smashed into me. Drinks went all over me. And I just said, they were arm in arm, young guys. And I said, what are you 2 clowns doing? And bam, this guy hit me. And then I don't really remember much because I tend to get a little bit, switched on. And the bouncers took us out. And then this almighty fight started. And they were part of a football team. So the whole footy team poured out the door. Luckily, I'd stepped aside. I was going to fight this guy had hit me originally. These guys poured out on top of these two bouncers who are just amazing fighters. These two bouncers just took these 30 guys apart. And in the end, I'd been a nurse for a couple of years in the 70s. I'm looking after this poor guy. He's on the floor. He's covered in blood. You know, his eyes are bad, and I'm sort of checking his spine, and I got taken my bloody shirt off, which is all ripped, and put it under his head. And this other guy's kneeling there, and we're both looking after this guy, waiting for the ambulance. And I looked at these two, and I suddenly realised these are the two guys who started it. They're the two guys that knocked into me and punched me. And there we are at the end after this mad battle. And I'm sort of looking after these guys like they're brothers, you know. And this other guy saying, "Is he going to be all right, mate?" And I said, "He'll be all right, don't you worry, you know, just wait, the ambos will be here soon." And so that's, you know, like you said, it's a bloody absurd.
I don't know if there's still bar fights these days. It was a mainstay of my what do you call it? You know, becoming a man is you went to the pub. And the crazy thing was you used to get these real hard nut characters, you know, like bikers. And there was one guy in the pub, he was actually an ex-Marine, even though I was a Marine, and he had this, but they used to always say like he was psychologically damaged in the Falklands War, which like I totally get, but the guy was also just a real dick. And like I remember one time he started on us, so we just offered him outside and beat the shit out of him, you know, because he's just a person. The head of the local biker clique started on me one day, so I just picked up a table and dropped it on him, and he shit his pants, and it was.
Well, you and I know that it's the size of the fight in the dog, not the size of the dog in the fight.
Yeah, and also so much like just bravado and bullshit and machismo and legend. And
I was a bouncer in this pretty rough nightclub in Newcastle. There's a lot of sailors used to come in, and a lot of footy players, and people would get really drunk in the 80s. You know, it was a great place, but man, it was always spew everywhere. When you turned the lights on, there was spew, and people collapsed everywhere. And yeah, this. Now I've lost track of why I was telling that story. What were you saying?
Well, I can chip in there and say I bought my first surfboard in Newcastle.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. You were having, is it your national day, the race day, when everyone just chills out Melbourne and gets drunk?
Yeah.
Yeah, I went into this.
I remember what I was leading to. I was the tiny bouncer, you know. Most of the guys were big Maoris, and like I'm talking big guys, like, you know, 6'8", broad-shouldered. We used to get a lot of Cook Islanders come in who were really dangerous guys. Like the Maoris actually scared of the Cook Islanders. But one night, I don't really know who he was, but he was famous amongst all these Maoris and all the bouncers. He was this hard man that everyone looked up to. We're having a few beers after work, and he just says, "Hey, who are you, man?" And I said, "Oh, my name's Dave." Shook his hand, and he's looking at me, and all these guys are gathered round, sort of hero worshiping, and he looks at me and he goes, "Oh," he says, "look at this guy." He looks at these guys, he says, "Can you see the smile of the tiger?" All right. And there was one real big guy who hated me, and he's going, "That guy, he's nothing." And this tough guy looks at him and goes, "You can't see. Look at him. You can't see what he is, you know, you can't see what this guy's capable of." And, you know, this guy was just a big boy. I'd been a copper for a number of years. I'd been through a lot of stuff. And he just saw that I'm a fighter. You know, I'm a mad Scotsman, actually. I've got that breed in me. And he saw it. He could see I'm a nice guy, but when I get stirred up, it's best to step away. It's a little bit mad.
How did I mentioned Nimbin earlier? So
yeah,
I'm really fortunate, David. You know, I after my let's just say after my chronic addiction, I just started traveling, and I went to everywhere on the planet that I ever wanted to go, and ended up on an expedition in Antarctica. And on part of that journey, I was in Australia. I walked into, I always call it Soho in Sydney, but it's not called Soho, is it? It's called...
It's King's Cross.
Yes, King's Cross. It's so funny. Whenever I say Soho, everyone knows the place that I mean. And I was looking at buying all these cars, these station wagons, as the Americans call them, and they were going for, in English, like £1,000, £2,000, whatever. And I went into a rental place, and they were like 60 quid a week. I don't know what that is in dollars, if that's 120 or 240, but it was cheap. So I rented this car, took the back seats out and left them at my friend's place. It was only a little hatchback. Bought me surfboard in Newcastle. They gave me a cheap price on it because they were all drunk, because it was the Derby day, or the race, the
Melbourne Cup.
Yeah, that one. And I end up in Byron Bay, your neck of the woods. And let's just say I was looking for a certain something, and someone said, "Oh, you got to go to Nimbin for that."
Yes, it's infamous.
Oh my gosh, Nimbin is our equivalent would be Glastonbury town, but Glastonbury town is more, a little bit spiritual, whereas Nimbin is hardcore hippie. Let's sell you some stuff.
It sort of became that. Like, I was there in the 70s, just after the Aquarius Festival, and so the real hippies were still there in the 70s. And being a surfer, I lived there for a brief period of a couple of weeks, but I just loved the sea. I loved the waves, but back then I liked to have a bit of a chuff, and I'd go to Nimbin to see friends, and people would just sort of hand you a spliff, and that was just normal life, and it didn't have that whole Amsterdam red light district sort of constantly being hassled by drugs, and that only really started probably in the late 80s, where heroin became a big problem there for a while. And now it's just sort of like a copy of itself. Like, it doesn't have there's still cool people there, that's for sure. But,
it just become overwhelmed by people trying to sell shit, basically. I remember.
It's just become that sort of trip. And I gave up smoking 40 years ago. I have no interest in it. I had my time. I certainly experimented a lot, and had some fun, and had some quite crappy times on the stuff too. Like, I don't know. I think sometimes back in those days in Queensland, we had this sort of virtual dictator called Joe Bielke Peterson. And if you got caught with even a roach, you could do time, like, it was seriously fascist about it all. And so we'd have to go and buy from these really evil bikers. You'd go to the bikie club, and they'd be looking at us skinny young surfies with our blonde hair, and they'd be sort of glowering, and older guys covered in grease and beards and that. Yeah, what do you want? And I'd sell you a little bit, and they used to cut it with God knows what, I don't know, meth or something. I'm sure they put stuff in sometimes because you'd get the weirdest sort of stone. And we used to smoke this hash oil, come in a cap, and it was actually cut with brake fluid. And for years, as soon as I'd smell brake fluid, I'd feel stoned. It smelled like hash. It was just a filthy scene, really. And I suppose the last smoke I had was in about 1980. Yeah. So that's a long time ago.
Yeah, good effort. Yeah, friends at home, we are not in any way condoning substance use, misuse. We're just
No.
we're just telling our story, so hopefully people can learn from it.
A big part of my story is that I got away from that shit. Like it used to talk to me. I got to the point after 3 years of coning pretty heavily, regularly with my mates. The drug was speaking to me saying, "You're mine, man. You're never getting away from me. You're never going to be not stoned, Dave. You're always going to be stoned." And I'm like, "No, that's not true. Oh yeah, you don't understand. You're mine." And I actually bailed out from surfing and everything, just went bush. I went out into the country, worked on an apple orchard, straightened out, and it was the best time of my life. I spent 6 months on this orchard by myself, and sometimes I wouldn't see another human for 3 weeks, just driving the tractor, picking apples, eating good food, not smoking, drinking, anything like that, and straightening out. And it was quite a surprise just how different my brain got as the months went by, how clearer the sky got, how I could put these long sentences together and still remember it all. And so I'm not a fan of dope. I believe in legalizing it, but I'm not really happy about lots of people getting into it because they talk a lot of bull about it, making it's like this harmless thing. It's not. It's a weird place to live.
No, if we're going to talk in biblical terms, I mean literally biblical. You're letting the devil into your life. Nothing good is ever going to come from poisoning yourself on a regular basis.
Nobody really knows what they're doing. Like you do infringe on the spiritual world, and on some of it that you infringe on is not the good side. And I actually found God through it in a way, because even when I was that ripped, I couldn't remember what my name was. God was still there. I still was this sort of a presence. I'd say, "Help me, bring me down. Can I hold on to your hand? I'm scared. I'm so scared." And that would be, and I felt this presence was with me, and I kept on having experiences like that. And I thought, that's what I should do. Like, I don't need drugs. I want to find out the meaning of life. I just set off.
Yeah, it can be like a stepping stone, and we're not talking about pain relief here, folks. That's a different thing again. But I'll tell you a funny story, David. I was a bouncer in Hong Kong for a while, and Hong Kong is like party central. It's Golden Triangle. It's anything you want there. Anyway, I was in this after party in a penthouse suite in a place called the Mid Levels in Hong Kong, and my friend's mother was the American consulate, the consulate general, whatever you call them, for the Americans in Hong Kong. And we're up there in the penthouse suite. The mum was away on some business trip, and so it was just us party heads. We'd all come out of the club in the morning, and we went back to this girl's house, and there were two characters. There were many characters there, but one of them was an Australian. We used to call him Hippie Pat, because he really was like your Nimbin sort of, character. He was fine, but he was
Like Neil.
Like Neil. He was always off his head,
Yeah.
And just coincidentally, I bumped into a couple of ex-Marines who were on their way back from jungle training. I think it was in Brunei, and they'd stopped in Hong Kong for the night. I'd bumped into them, in the nightclub, and naturally I said, "Joe, you want to come to a party in the morning?" And this big Marine chap, Knocker, he wasn't really familiar with that kind of party scene. He was your sort of hardcore drinker,
Yeah.
And this guy would do anything for a fight. He would just, if you didn't tie your shoelaces right, he'd be ready to knock you out. And
Yeah.
but we still have a bond because we're brothers through both being Marines, And we're in this penthouse suite, and Hippie Pat, he's out on the balcony, and it was a beautiful morning in Hong Kong, and he was just leaning back, catching the rays, this big, like, angelic grin on his face, and this big Marine named Knocker is out on the balcony chatting to me, and he looks at this guy, and you can just see he just wants to fight. He wants to rile this guy, this Hippie Pat. He wants to punch him for no other reason other than the fact he's just a bit of a psychopath. And Hippie Pat, he'd taken his shoes off, and his toes were poking through his socks. He was long overdue a new pair of socks.
He was a hippie, all right.
Yeah, but he's doing no harm to no one, And this big Marine looks at him and says, "You want to get a new pair of socks, mate, don't you?" And Hippie Pat's like, "Oh yeah, man." And the Marine's like, "And you want to sort your fucking life out while you're at it." Right? And he's looking for Hippie Pat to just say one thing. Just say one thing so I can punch you. And Hippie Pat just looks at him and goes, "Yeah, you're right, man."
Good on him. That's the best fighter.
He literally said the one thing that would stop him getting. The guy couldn't say anything. He was like, "Oh, right, okay." So,
yeah.
David, my gosh, where do we even begin? How does Viking culture relate to, I don't know, the afterlife, spiritual connection, reincarnation, advanced humanoids, all this kind of stuff, and feel free to start at the beginning.
Okay. Well, to tell you the truth, I mean the Vikings were always, I just like the real Viking stories about actual dudes who would go on these trips and fight other Vikings and raid and bring back treasure and marry these bitches who made their life hell and got them into other fights with other blokes. And that's what the Viking sagas are really about. Like, the women are as hard as the men, and there's all this stuff goes on. And I was never really that interested in their gods. I knew a lot about Thor and Odin and Loki and all that stuff, but to me, having been into the Christian thing pretty hard, the last thing I needed was another religion. I had, back in the 90s, there was a lot of people getting into this, what's called Ausatru, which is the true, it sort of means the faith of the Aesir, which is it's the real word for the gods. They translate it as gods, but it means something else. And it basically means powerful people who came from Asia Minor, Anatolia, Turkey, like where Troy was. This is a whole subject in itself. But anyway, all the years since the 80s, when I had my near-death experience in 1980, which led to this period as a Christian, which was pretty far out. I had a lot of amazing experiences, like really different, unusual experiences with God. And then when I left, I thought, well, who was that I was dealing with there, this God that I thought I was dealing with? I don't think it's necessarily Jesus or conforms to this religion. So I got into Indian yoga, I got into Chinese kung fu, got into art, and over the years I tried to find how does this stuff that I found power in all those things, and I thought, what's the defining thing? And what I discovered was there's this feeling in the back of your head in kung fu, in art, in yoga. There's this tradition of going not in the conscious mind, but going to the back of your head and using that complex, which is where the subconscious mind is. And over the years, I've got pretty good at it, getting into that space. And I've experienced some really far out things in art, kung fu, and yoga. And I was starting to write this book called The Portal. I sort of came up with this concept that it's like a portal, like a gateway that connects to the universe. And when you switch off the conscious mind, stop thinking, stop stressing, stop worrying about what's happening next, you just hear. And it's what people call mindfulness. That's literally, mindfulness is the name of the first form of the Chinese kung fu I practice, which is called Wing Chun. But this whole thing, it was, I've done a lot of research and a lot of writing. So I was writing to this, and then I met Paul Anthony Wallace and started reading his books, watching his videos. And he was talking about how the Bible's wrongly translated in the Old Testament, where when they say God, it's actually this word Elohim, which is a plural word, and it essentially means the powerful ones. And the word heaven doesn't actually mean heaven like some kind of spiritual place. It means the sky. It means the outer space. And as soon as you do that translation change, suddenly you think, well, what are we reading here? It's not really a religious thing. This is sort of seems to be about these powerful beings that came from the sky and could fly and had these weapons and, this really interesting stuff. And because I'd been so fully into the church and Christianity and the Bible, I read the Bible through a lot. I knew he was telling the truth. I went and looked and went, yeah, this is actually true. And as fate has it, I think it was meant to be. This Icelandic mate of mine rang me one day and said there's a family down here in Sydney who's got a collection of 200 rare books in Old Norse, Viking language, belonged to a professor who was their father, and it's either going to go to the dump or to somebody. And I said, no, it's not going to the bloody dump. So they brought it up to me, and then I because of this Bible thing, I thought, I wonder what the Viking myths of the gods are like. Do they mistranslate this stuff? And so as I started looking straight away, I found the same thing. I found the word that they translate as gods it's not really talking about gods. It's talking about mortals who can die, but they live for a really long time. And they appear to have flying machines, and they have these weapons where they can strike people blind. Like Odin in battle could strike people blind. Now, we've got weapons like that. We're developing all those sort of things for battle, and we got the non-lethal weapon type stuff. And if you read the Vikings stories, they're talking about stuff like that. And I'm thinking, bloody hell, this is the same thing. And suddenly I was interested in these gods because I saw that it wasn't something I had to worship. These were actually ancient tales that carried this whole amazing story hidden behind the language. But because I can read the language, I can speak Icelandic, I've been able to get in and translate the truth, what I think is the truth out of it. And so that's what it's about. And it's not just about finding these far out paleo contact stories, but I do believe in human superpowers. And that's what I'm finding in these stories, even in the stories about Vikings just going on adventures. they'll just be doing something ordinary, and next thing something really strange happens. A troll turns up, or somebody does some magic, or they make the ground open up and somebody's horse falls in, like these wizards, and it's so interesting because I think right now we're at a completely new world, and AI, you know what it can do now, but it's just getting more and more powerful. And everything's changing so rapidly that the human is becoming obsolete super fast. Like even as an artist, it's hardly worth me painting anymore because I just say to the AI, paint me a Viking dude flying through the air on a golden flying saucer, and he's got, big hair and a big beard, and it goes 1, 2, 3, and just produces this amazing picture. But I think that what I'm doing and a lot of other people are doing is really important. What you're doing, putting these sort of things out there, is that we humans have powers that have been denied for so long. You go and look at Wikipedia, look up ESP, psychic abilities, telepathy, these things, and they will tell you, oh, this is pseudoscience. There's absolutely no proof of this. Nobody's ever done this stuff. This is all crap. But the fact is, there's a group called the Guerrilla Skeptics of Wikipedia, a couple of hundred people who are professionally doctoring every reference to this sort of stuff. As soon as anybody puts up anything positive, they'll get in there and change it. They're fighting it.
Yeah, Wikipedia, we talk about it a lot on this channel. It's basically propaganda for the global mafia. Whatever they want you to believe,
Yeah, well, that's it. It's these paper and leather things are super valuable because this I can trust. It's like Conan's dad said to him, you can't trust gods, giants, trolls, or men, but you can trust this, Conan. You can trust the sword. You can trust steel. And same with books. They say what they say, and it's always there. They can't get in and digitally stuff with it.
So, David, you said you had a couple of stories you wanted to impart to us.
Yeah. Firstly, I just want to say to the lads watching this and the lassies, I'm not saying I'm some kind of far out guy. My experiences are pretty extraordinary, but it's not like something that happens to me all the time. I'm not like a wizard like Gandalf. I can't make dragons fly through the air with fireworks or any of that sort of stuff.
Not yet.
However, I really believe in my fellow man. I believe within all of us there's superpowers. And one particularly amazing thing happened to me where I was really into my Kung Fu practice. And when I started this Kung Fu, I thought it would be, Bruce Lee, Jeet Kune Do. That's my early background in martial arts. In the 70s, I was a kickboxer, getting into the ring, really hammering each other, covered in bruises, loving it. I just love the tough guy thing. Always muscular, always at the gym, surfing. So when I started this Wing Chun Kung Fu, I thought that's what it was going to be because it was Bruce Lee's art. And the first thing the teacher says to me was, you can forget all your muscles and your twitch speed and your tricky boxing moves. This is not that. Our power comes from being soft. Our power comes from the mind. And I'm like, what? Really? And so over the years, I've sort of learned, like I was talking about earlier, what the idea in this Kung Fu is to switch off the frontal cortex and use the rear. And it's a form of meditation. So anyway, after doing that for many, many years, I was having a real intense training period. And I said to God, the universe, the old Chinese Kung Fu masters, I just imagine somebody's listening to me. I said, I really want to go to the next level in this mind force that we use. And this thing's real. People tend to say bullshit, but I prove to people actually, but, it's easy to talk. But Anyway, I said, I want to go to the next level. So a couple of days later, I'm driving from the Gold Coast. I'm by myself in the car. I didn't have music playing. Nothing was really going on. I was going 20 minutes to where I live. And as I crossed this bridge over a big water, big inlet, I saw, like clear as watching a TV, I saw a little red car and a young guy and a girl in the car. And I saw the guy turn and just go, pow, just hit this girl full power, just smash. Big right-hander. And I was instantly enraged, and I just wanted to go to her aid. I was just like, fuck, I was just going to, sorry, is it all right to swear on your channel?
Yeah.
So I just, I was like, and then I went, oh shit, I'm just driving the car. What's this? Like, what was that? It just seemed to go through my head. It was like, but I saw it as clear as I was looking at it. And so another 20 minutes, I'm driving back to my little town, and I'm thinking that was pretty weird, but a bit of a fantasy, I guess. So I see the service station on the left. I look at the fuel. I don't need fuel. And this little, like a voice or something was saying to me, turn in. Don't need fuel. Turn in. Nah. Then the third one said, turn in. And I went, oh, far out, righto. So I turn in, and I just get this really strong message, turn in. So I see a little shop, and there's veggies and stuff. I said, okay, I'll just buy some chili and garlic and stuff I like for stir fries. There's a little Indian man in there. I start chatting to him, and he says, mate, you wouldn't believe what just happened. He says, a car just pulled up in front of my shop. There was a guy and a girl in the car. The guy punched the girl as hard as he could in the head, and she's just been taken off in an ambulance, and the police are chasing the guy. And I went, so when did this happen? He said, 20 minutes ago, which is exactly, it takes exactly 20 minutes from where I had that vision to there. And then I told him, I said, you probably won't believe this, but, and I told him what I just told you. And he looks at me and he goes, oh, us Indians would believe that we believe such things are true. So, I don't know, a year or two later, there was a meeting in Sydney of all the Kung Fu masters came from Hong Kong. And because I'm sort of senior student of 26 years or so, and everyone likes me, they said, oh, come and have, a little special dinner with the masters. So I told them that story, and they're looking at me, these two guys. One guy speaks really good English, another guy not so much, and this guy's wife. And they look at me and goes, yeah, this stuff happens. And he said, Westerners don't believe it, so we don't tell them about it. But he said, that's, I agree with you. That's a real thing you experience. I said, well, what was it? He goes, you just saw it, And, that scene in Star Wars, the first movie where Obi-Wan's watching Luke with his, learning how to use the lightsaber, and suddenly the planet gets blown up, Princess Leia's home planet. And he's like, oh, I've got to sit down. He goes, I feel like, a million voices cried out at once. It was that, not as dramatic, but it was that sort of thing. It was like a wave went out of the anger and the pain, bam. And somehow I'm receptive, and I got it. And that's the only time, or once before, but many years before, but that's the only two that I'd call really definitely telepathic. And you can't say that's possible by modern science. They'd say, no, that's impossible. How could you, that's impossible, but it really did happen. And
well, you reminded me there. Quick anecdote. I was at my dad's house when I was younger, watching television. It was a comedy show. And as I'm watching this show, I thought, wouldn't it be funny if you had a guy like rock up to a house, knock on a door, the person answers the door, and he says, hi, I'm a double glazing salesman. And traditionally in our culture, you like shut the door immediately. It's a bit like
Yeah.
Jehovah's Witness. No disrespect to Jehovah's Witness, but and wouldn't it be funny if the person at the door went, "Oh, okay, yeah, come on in," and the salesman's like, "No, you don't understand. I'm like a double glazing salesman." Yeah, I get that. Come on in. He's like, no. I'm going to try and sell you double glazing that you don't even need. Yeah, but we do need double. Anyway, I was just playing that in my mind, thinking that'd be quite a funny. That'd be a funny sketch, wouldn't it, for this kind of show? And as I'm thinking that, I'm looking at this TV screen, and there's a guy walking up the garden path, and he knocks on the door, and a woman answers, and he says, "Hi, I'm here to sell you double glazing." And she says, "Oh, come on in." He's like,
Wow.
No, you don't understand. I'm a double glazing salesman. You're supposed to tell me to F off. She's like, no, you don't need come in. He's like, no, you really don't understand. And my gosh, I mean, is that just the ultimate in coincidence, or is it just,
No,
you
it's
know,
the reality that they deny. It's, people often tell me stuff because they know that I'm not only really open-minded, but I'm also really down to earth. Like, I'm not a hippie tripper. I'm not somebody who just believes any old thing because it sounds nice. I really do keep an extremely open mind, but I also keep a lot of skepticism simmering underneath and go, well, is this a coincidence? Could that be possible? But you have that's not a coincidence. That's actually, you reached out, your mind knew that was coming. You picked up that was coming from that TV station. And it's actually it's becoming aware of those small ones that are, sort of a little miracle that leads to the big ones. You've probably heard this before, but if you want to get good at this sort of stuff, you got to start taking notice of it. And I always jot things down. I write a note. It's like, when you're walking out the door and something says, "Go back, you left the stove on." That, and people do, like, "Oh no," and they go out and they come back and sure enough, the stove's on. Hopefully the house is not on fire. But through my life, there was so many of these events that I eventually started to think, this is real. I don't know how it works, but I seem to have a bit of a thing where I pick up on stuff. And, my mum passed away a couple of months ago. She's very elderly, but we were very close. And she told me just recently that her mother and her grandmother both they were Irish, Irish descent, and they had this gift of seeing unlike what other people usually have, a way of seeing without seeing with the eyes. And it's a very old tradition in Scotland, in the Highlands especially, and in Ireland. And that's where my family comes from. And I have no doubt at all that I'm just from a family that has that gift, and the Sassenach doesn't believe it. The atheist, scientific, superior one who knows better than us ordinary fools, they don't like coming up against me, though, because I've got a lot of training and background in, I got medical training, legal training, read a lot of books in my time, and they try to bamboozle me. And I'm like, really? Okay, well, let's talk about this, because there's so much. And this is a brag, all right, but it's a cool story. You recognize this guy?
is that Uri Geller?
Yeah. He lives in England. He's lived there for a long time. He sent me this, says, "To Dave Lovegrove, my best wishes and see you again soon, Uri Geller." So I always thought he was really cool. And one day I'm in Coolangatta, which is, south end of the Gold Coast, and watching this amazing juggler, young girl, just doing these incredible things. And there's this dude stand beside me, and I'm just chatting to him like, "Far out, man! Isn't this great?" He's going, "Yeah, she's amazingly talented." I said, "Where are you from?" He says, "Oh, I'm from Israel." "Yeah, there's something about you. I don't know what it is." I said, "You just seem familiar. Have I met you before?" He says, "You probably know me. I've been on TV a bit. My name's Uri Geller." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, right. That's who you are, Uri Geller." But he was just really a nice guy, and we chatted for a while. And then, maybe 20 years ago, I found his email or something, and I had a few books that had things about him, and he wrote to me and said, "Hey, if you don't mind, if you find references to me, send them, because I sort of keep a bit of a record of what people think, positive and negative." So we've kept in touch over the years. And since I started on this Viking superpowers thing, you wouldn't believe the people I've met. Like, I've met some really high level people in this field. This guy called Colonel John B. Alexander. Have you seen that film, Men Who Stare at Goats?
Yes, I've actually I've got it on my hard drive. I've been meaning to watch it again. Can you jog our memories? What it's about? Is it some military experiment?
Yeah,
Isn't it?
it's about U.S. Army, about 1980. This general finds out the Russians are looking hard into psychic abilities, and so he goes, "Right, we can't let the Ruskies get ahead of us." So he sets up this unit, and Kevin Spacey's in it.
George Clooney.
George Clooney, yeah, the super handsome grey-headed fella.
No, that's me. That's me. You're talking about.
Yeah, he's very much like you, and
Oh,
all these.
I used to have some grey hair.
The bald head's very handsome, mate. Don't let anybody tell you the opposite. But
You're so kind.
anyway, the film's about this unit, and they sort of get into all sorts of freaky stuff, hippie things, and really thinking way outside the box. And Ewan McGregor's like this young. Well, he's an army guy, yeah, right. Ewan McGregor's an army guy too, but it's sort of it's completely made up, but it's based on my friend Colonel John Alexander's real experience in this thing called Project Stargate, which was started in the army, and then it moved on to the CIA. And I first saw him on a show about Hong Kong, a movie set in Hong Kong called Push, about all these young people who had these outrageous psychic powers, sort of telekinetic powers, real strong ones, and the ability to read people's minds and whatever. And at the end of that film, there was a Scottish producer and director was really fascinated, and he made this thing called like the science behind the fiction. And he talks to John Alexander about it, and he tells him, this stuff's real. We've known this stuff's real for a long time. It's hidden from the public, but in the US Army and these other places, we've really convinced ourselves that it's real. And he's a friend of Uri Geller's, and so I've interviewed him a number of times, and he's really been very good to me and taught me a lot of stuff. And
do you think you don't have to answer this because he's obviously your friend, and I'd love to have him on the show. What a character! But was Yuri pulling a bit of a scam there? Do you think? Or I'm not saying that psycho whatever doesn't exist. I'm just wondering if he had his time, if that makes sense.
No, like, honestly, he's the real deal. This guy was a special forces soldier in Vietnam.
I'm talking about I'm talking about Yuri now.
Yuri. Right, yeah, Colonel Alexander, he's a real hardcore dude. I love him. He's a special forces guy like you. No, I think Yuri's the real deal too. I really do. He's a, you know, he's a handsome superstar sort of guy, and I think that with a lot of these guys, you know, I don't really know that much about his life. I've only met him briefly, but I sort of give him the benefit of the doubt. Colonel Alexander's first time I interviewed him, he's got this like a case behind him, and I said, "What's in that case? It looks very interesting." And he says, "Oh, there's all the forks and spoons that Uri Geller bent the first time that we'd got him together in the. It was either the Congress, I don't think it's the White House. It was like one of those famous American government places, and all these high-powered people had got together for what they call a side party, and they all bent the spoons, and Yuri was there, and he sort of got them going, and then people started going, "Look at this," and the spoons were doing it. They were doing it themselves, and it was all random stuff that had been brought in. There was no trickery or magic, and because people, the haters always say, "Oh, he's just a really good magician," but it was happening with people, just randoms who'd come to these parties, and he was telling them how to think and whatever, and next thing it was happening. And interesting thing, in our Kung Fu, our old Chinese master who revealed all this to us said, "Look, the truth is people think you've got to spend 30 years to achieve this high standard, but you actually have it. Like every baby has the power, every animal has the power. You've just got this accretion of conscious mind that's holding the power back. And what we do in Kung Fu is not try to learn. We aim to let go, like stop being in control, and it's like the superpower of somebody who's off their head on angel dust or something, or crazy. It's like that, but it's under your control. And I've got a Kung Fu YouTube channel. It's not very flash or sophisticated, but I talk endlessly about Kung Fu. But there's a few demos I do there, and I often go to schools and I teach the kids. I draw with two hands at once. I think I don't know if you saw it, but I made an ad for Qantas Airlines where I'm drawing with two hands at once, and that created a bit of a stir. So when I go to schools, kids always want to see that. Sometimes it's like hundreds of kids, and I'm there drawing. They go, "Whoa!" It blows their minds. And then I say, "Okay, I'll show you something different. I'll show you some real Kung Fu." And I look around for the biggest sports teacher I can see, somebody who looks bigger than me. And I get them to come down and say, "Look, I'm not going to punch or kick you. I just want you to stop me. You use both hands, lean in, do whatever you want. I'm going to move my hand like this, and you've got to stop me." And it's easy to stop somebody, and I say, "Stop me," and I push it. I use every bit of muscle. I can't move them. And I say, "Watch this. Keep trying." Then I relax. I put my mind into the skin of my hand, and I think this guy's not there. And then I move like that, and they get flung. And I don't understand how it works, but it works. It's incredible power. And I've had people say to me, "Well, what's the use of that in the fight?" So, mate, what do you think I could do if I hit you with that, with intent to hurt you? If I can move a man as big or bigger than me effortlessly, and he can't stop me with both hands, do you think that might have some power in it? And have you heard of Dim Mak?
No, enlighten me.
Dim Mak, it's like a legendary Kung Fu power of being able to kill somebody with a touch. And, if you really go the full Kung Fu mysticism, it's like just a light touch and then somebody drops dead like 2 hours later. I can't do that. And I know people have told me that they believe it's real. I don't really know if it's real, but it's sort of like that. It's like it's all mind. It's like the world becomes virtual, and the stuff you do becomes, and you have to sort of feel it. There's a lot of charlatans out there online which bring it all into disrepute. People sort of shrug, people bounce around, or they don't even touch them and they're bouncing away. That's generally bullshit. But there is some real stuff that's quite stunning. When you feel it, people go, my God, like, that's real. Like, far out, that's actually real. You know what my dream is?
Go on.
I want to practice really hard and meet Joe Rogan, because he's often, you know, I really like Joe, and he's super famous, of course, but he often talks about the, you know, the bullshit kung fu, how traditional stuff's no good against MMA and this sort of thing. I'd like to show him a few things and see what he thinks, because he's obviously strong as an ox. And I'd love to get him to say, okay, Joe, you stop me moving, and just go, you know, I can get it so that they hold me and try to stop me coming this way, and the same thing happens. Now, I'm an old man. I'm still strong, but I'm not that strong. So it's something else. It's like an animal power. It's sort of like you turn into a chimpanzee or something, you know. It sort of feels like that.
Yeah, I've been emailing Joe Rogan every week, telling him I can teach him a thing or two.
Yeah,
I'm going to teach him the Raw Marines double punch. You don't even see it.
I'm interested in that.
There you go. You don't even see it coming. I'll have to edit this video, and I'm going to slow it down so people can.
Can I tell you something? You're the only person involved in any martial art I've ever heard say that. And it's so bloody obvious, but everyone still goes, oh, here comes the punch. I block, I step, I strike. Whereas in Wing Chun, you know what we do? Boom. That's it. You know, that's what we do. Our wooden dummy, we spend half the time hitting it with both hands at the same time. Bam. And we're kicking it at the same time. So 2 strikes and a kick at the same time. The fact that you said that's remarkable. Like, somebody really smart learnt that in the Marines, because it's one of those things people just don't think about it. And I say to people, why wouldn't you do that? Why would you strike 1-2 if you can do two barrels? Like, give them both barrels. Boom. You know?
Hey, Joe Rogan never got back to me, so he's a chicken. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
He's afraid of me. Joe, if you're watching, probably didn't even see that.
We'll see who can get to him first. I wish you luck.
Yes. I like the teaching your student how to block the eyeball gouge with the double fingers, and you teach him how to place your hand like that.
Taught me that.
But then you just go.
You gotta go.
David, it's been a wonderful chat. There's probably, well, I mean, you know, obviously we could chat forever. There's been a million things more we can chat about. Gosh, you're a fascinating guy, and I like chatting to fascinating people. And so let's get some feedback from this podcast. Friends, put your questions below, and let's go again at some point.
Absolutely, mate. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, definitely. We'll put all your links below the video, David. So friends at home, if you want to chuck this video a like if you liked it, subscribe to David's channel, and let us know what you think. What should we be talking about next? Yeah. David, stay on the line so I can thank you properly. I'm just going to play us out, and then I'll get back to you. But massive thank you, and much love to everybody down under.
Thanks, mate. We can feel it.
Cheers. Cause I've been living